El gran y hermoso proyecto de ley de Donald Trump. Sin duda, amigos, le está explotando en la cara. Ahora mismo su mirada está puesta en el Senado, donde no solo vimos cómo es que Tom Hills fue atacado por él, hasta que éste decidió retirarse, ¿no? Por oponerse a la agenda, sino que ahora lanzó una campaña total en contra de Ron Paul. La razón, le está dando golpes demoledores a la agenda trumpista, y eso lo está sacando completamente de quicio. Vamos a analizar todo esto, pero primero hay que empezar con lo que dijo Ron Paul para desatar esta furia trumpista.
Senator from Kentucky.
In deciding whether to vote for the big, not so beautiful bill, I've asked a very specific question. Will the deficit be more or less next year? The answer, without question, is this bill will grow the deficit. The federal government has fancy formulas and hundreds of wonky accountants who inform us of their projections over 10 years. But you often can't trust these projections. In an excellent piece written by the Foundation for Economics and Education entitled "The CBO's Projections Are Worse Than Useless," Eric Schuler writes, "Long-term analysis and language is commonplace in U.S. national politics, but it achieves no useful outcome. It confuses far more than it clarifies. It does not provide accurate estimates of long-term results. It does not improve the average voter's understanding of policy effects. And it gives politicians a means to claim they are being fiscally responsible without actually exercising any prudence whatsoever. Sometimes the predictions are off because a new Congress is elected and changes the law. Eric Schuler writes that for any projection of a 10-year budget to be accurate, the Congressional Budget Office has to assume that the law won't change for 10 years, even as most of the politicians that make the laws risk being replaced every 2 years, and all of them advocate for changes of one stripe or another. Schuler states that few in Washington will admit Congress has a knack for starting any proposed cuts in the later years, while letting spending run wild in the immediate future. Sometimes these predictions are off by $1 trillion or so because the economy grew more slowly or more quickly than anticipated. Bruce Thompson, a former Senate aide and Assistant Secretary of Treasury, writes, "The Congressional Budget Office miscalculated the deficit last year by $1 trillion. So in deciding whether to vote for any big, monstrous bill, it helps to ask the right question. To me, the most pertinent question is how will the bill affect the deficit in the next year? Currently, our deficit is estimated to be a little under $2 trillion this year. What will happen to the debt in 2026 if this bill passes? Well, using the math most favorable to the supporters of the bill, referred to as the policy baseline, the deficit in 2026 will still be $270 billion more than this year. So even using the math, even using the formulas that the supporters of the bill like, the deficit will grow by $270 billion next year. That's just not good if you profess to be fiscally conservative. Why will the deficit grow next year? Well, even if you argue that the 2017 tax cuts don't need to be counted in the calculation at all, the new tax cuts add up to $234 billion to the debt next year. In addition, the big not-so-beautiful bill adds new spending of over $500 billion, military, border, agricultural subsidies, etc. That spending is front-loaded and will be spent in the first 4 years of the 10-year window. Legislated spending is one of the few items in the bill that is exact. It isn't estimated. If they say they'll spend $500 billion, they're going to spend $500 billion, all in the first few years. So in order not to add to the deficit, the BBB, the big not-so-beautiful bill, has to have corresponding spending cuts to counter all the new spending. Unfortunately, the spending cuts are backloaded to the final 5 years of the 10-year window when several tax cuts expire and the spending increases are finished. In addition, elections occur every 2 years and could easily wipe out any perceived savings that might occur in the later years. The only real certainty in this budget drama are the budget years coming in the immediate future.
Y es que bueno, yo no me considero para nada una persona conservadora, pero si tú lo eres, pues déjame decirte que Ron Paul está dando una excelente razón para no apoyar este proyecto de ley. Más allá de los recortes del Medicaid, más allá de que los demócratas han criticado sin parar, me parece que su enfoque toca un tema que quizás no hemos discutido tanto, nos guste o no su perspectiva. Claro, también hemos visto a senadores como Ron Johnson, ¿no?, oponiéndose a este proyecto porque no afecta a suficientes personas. Pero esto revela lo poco que a los republicanos realmente les importa la crisis del déficit. Paul dijo que si votan a favor de este proyecto, ellos serían los responsables de esta crisis. Por eso es que Trump ha vuelto a sacar las amenazas y bueno, las podemos ver aquí. Trump escribió lo siguiente en Truth Social. Para todos los republicanos que quieren recortar gastos, y yo soy uno, recuerden que todavía tienen que ser reelegidos. No se vuelvan locos, nosotros lo compensaremos todo con un crecimiento 10 veces mayor que nunca antes. Así que las amenazas de primarias están al tope. Esto, amigos, es todo lo que le queda a Trump. Esta es la herramienta del culto para intentar pasar su pésima agenda. Todavía hay la posibilidad de que más republicanos se opongan, ¿no? Lo cual pues podría ayudar porque los demócratas han estado haciendo un trabajo excelente para denunciarla. Por ejemplo, escuchemos lo que dijo la senadora Patty Murray en este clip.
President.
I recognize the senator from Washington State.
I thank the senator from Oregon and our other budget chairs, ranking members from previous years, because this is really important. Mr. President, there are some things you can't change with legislation, despite what my colleagues on the other side of the aisle seem to believe. For example, 1 + 1 is 2, and while $1 trillion might have a lot of zeros in it, it is, in fact, a much, much bigger number. Now, that might sound obvious, but apparently my colleagues across the aisle need a little reminder, because right now, Republicans are pretending not to get it. It is almost beyond belief, and it is certainly beyond common sense. After years of complaining about the debt, in fact, at the same time they're talking about how we need to address the debt, Republicans now are suddenly pretending they don't know how to count. Republicans are suddenly pretending the parliamentarian doesn't exist if they don't talk to her. Republicans are suddenly pretending that precedent doesn't exist if they just fake amnesia, and that norms and consequences for breaking them will disappear if they wish it away really hard. My preschool students had more common sense. Republicans should know if they replace math with magic, if they tear up the Senate process, if they blow off the Senate parliamentarian, that bill will come due. And not just the bill for $4 trillion blown on tax cuts for billionaires and corporations. The bill will also come due for trashing this Senate process and precedent when Republicans are no longer in the majority. Mr. President, if Republicans are serious about plowing forward with rewriting or ignoring Senate procedure and the laws of mathematics, I just ask, spare me the empty excuses. Spare me the explanations that totally ignore the reality of what you are doing. I mean, do they really think it washes away everything to say, oh, it's fine to break the process in half because we say it's fine? Oh, it's fine. We have the authority to ignore math. Give me a break. To every Republican who really thinks that is a convincing argument, to anyone who thinks we can is just an acceptable rationale for going nuclear and pretending the most expensive bill in the history of our country can be paid for by some magic bean counting, here is my challenge to you. Go back home and try that game with your constituents. Tell them It's okay. Yes, the debt's going to be $4 trillion, higher 10 years from now. That's true. But it's fine. We voted on it. And we get to say $1 trillion is actually zero. Go ahead. See how that works for you. And you may as well tell them you are voting against gravity next, because that's just as reasonable. And don't forget, when you tell your families back home that trillions of dollars in tax cuts for billionaires and companies are free because you waved a wand or you said some magic words, don't forget to tell them those are just tax cuts for the billionaires, not for working families. Don't forget to tell the folks back home, yeah, I voted to say $1 trillion is nothing, but we still need to kick people off of their health care. That's just too expensive. We still need to close those hospitals. We have to cut costs, and we still have to kick people off SNAP because the debt is out of control. And don't forget to mention that, no, we can't afford childcare. We can't afford paid family leave. We can't afford to solve your problems. Magic math is apparently just for billionaires. You all are getting less. Please, Republicans, send that message to your constituents. Just see how it goes over. Because you can fool yourself, but you are not going to fool the American people. They don't get to balance their budget with magic math. They don't get to pretend $1 trillion is nothing. And they don't get to pretend that this bill is free. Because at the end of the day, regardless of what policy baseline you all want to use in DC, those families back home, they're the ones who will be paying the actual cost. I yield back to the Senator from Oregon.
I yield to a question.
I would.
In the time that you were budget chair, did you ever contemplate a situation in which you argued that renewing a tax break that was by law expiring would somehow have no impact on the deficit?
To my friend from Oregon, I never would have contemplated and I never would have put it forward, and I happen to know that if I had have suggested that my Republican colleagues would have been all over me telling me that.
Todos sabemos que esto es una aberración. Hasta los republicanos que voten a favor lo reconocen. Eso es lo que escuchamos de Josh Hawley, quien alertó sobre los millones de ciudadanos que perderían su seguro de salud, el daño que esto haría a la infraestructura sanitaria del país. Pero bueno, esto solo demuestra lo poco que les importa realmente cumplir con su labor, o lo hipócritas que son al alinearse tan fácilmente con Donald Trump. Muchísimas gracias por acompañarme hasta el final de este video. Recuerda, como siempre, dale like, compártelo con tus amigos y suscríbete a nuestro canal Políticamente Desacuerdo. Nos vemos en el próximo video. Hasta luego.